The Energy Transition Podcast takes you directly to the cutting edge of the global energy sector's shift, with a specific focus on the critical role played by oil and gas, as well as the pathways developing around a lower carbon future. Your hosts, Leslie Beyer, Energy Workforce and Technology Council's CEO, and Dan Pickering, founder of Pickering Energy Partners, are joined by Josh Lowrey, president of Upright Digital. Each episode engages industry thought leaders in an exploration of market-moving trends and topics, including new technologies, ESG, capital markets, inclusion and diversity, workforce innovation, regulatory influences, and the voice of the people. Join us as the Energy Transition Podcast looks at the state of the traditional energy and oil field service sectors, emerging technologies, and the path ahead in a world of lower carbon energy development.
Welcome to the Energy and Transition Podcast. We are coming to you live from the newest studio at the Upright Digital Podcast Studios in Houston, Texas. I am joined, as usual, with the co-host extraordinaire, Mr. Dan Pickering. How are you, sir?
I am very well.
Well,
I love the new studio.
Thank you. This is our first time in this.
Yes, it feels very cozy.
It is. It's cozy. It's nice. Everything is underneath the stage. The sound should be much better. The lighting is different than the last studio. So we're remodeling the old studio. It's things are growing around here.
Josh, do I look cuter in this studio?
You know, I was going to tell you, I look like a bum. You look great today. I wore this shirt for you on purpose. My Dallas Cowboys were in the playoffs, and in honor of your Texans questions.
Yes.
And then absolutely blowing the number one pick.
I know.
We
can't even lose the right way.
I immediately thought of you in a truly sincere, sorry way when they blew the number one pick.
Yes. By winning their third game.
By
third
winning.
And final game
by
of the season.
Winning, yes.
So, yes.
Well, how was your Christmas and your holiday season? Did you enjoy it?
Holidays were great. I had a 3.5-year-old for 9 straight days, including 4 days on my own. So that was a new experience that never go anywhere without help. That's my new mantra. But it was a blast.
Good.
A great time. And you?
Same. The kid, I have like the peak children age that are enjoying Christmas. My daughter, very nervous that coal was coming around, which is pretty funny to see a kid like, is there a chance that I get coal in my stocking? And my son he fills out the Christmas list just to make sure, like,
just in case.
Like, I'm not screwing this up for anybody. Here's my list. I'm going to hang it on the fridge. My daughter mailed hers. If that gives you any idea how sincere they are. Yeah. But yeah, this is it. 2023. Let's get going.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
Let's go. And today may be one of our most intense and concise podcasts because our guest has stuff to do around town. And so I'm pleased to welcome Alex Tiller, CEO and founder of Carbonvert. And so, Alex, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Nice to meet you, Josh.
And as I was prepping for this discussion, I realized that we've been on quite a run around carbon capture. Mm-hmm. And Carbonvert is kind of a first mover, and so we're gonna learn a lot from this discussion with Alex. But we've been talking about it a lot, but it's also sort of really seen an increase in profitability around the IRA, and it feels like it's catching a lot of traction. So before we dive into what you do, Alex, tell us a little bit about who you are and how'd you wind up sitting in the seat at a carbon capture business?
Sure. Thanks, Dan. And I grew up in a small town called Springfield, Ohio, kind of the rural edge of town out in the cornfields and soybean fields. Pretty humble beginnings. My single parent mom that raised me and my brother. And we left, both my brother and I left pretty much right after high school and headed out into the world. Went to school in Boston, undergrad at Northeastern University, and then later in life I went back and did my MBA at MIT Sloan. It's been an interesting journey. I started my career at Fidelity Investments. And this was during the big.
As did I in the investing business. So.
I think I was a few years after.
Yes, I'm older. You're younger.
I think it was 98 for me.
Alex is throwing bombs immediately here.
That's right. That's right.
Well, 98 means it was 25 years ago. So
right,
that's not
happening.
Exactly that. I think we're both showing our age a little bit here. But started my career at Fidelity. It was an interesting time. It was the .com boom. Everybody was doing .com this and that, and I was fortunate that I got to be in the product development group, and so we were building technology products for the first time, putting brokerage technology on the internet for the first time. And that baffles people nowadays, the younger people that are like, we don't even understand how did you ever do it before? You know, it was a phone call.
Well, you went to Netscape, and
you went to the bank. The bank had, a direct, had actual software that wired into the mainframe, right? I mean, it was a unique time and really interesting. And so Fidelity taught me how to develop business lines, and I was jealous. I was jealous of all the cool .comers that were, doing beer pong on their conference tables and had the kegerators and this and that. Fidelity was much more buttoned up and corporate. But after a few years at Fidelity in that role and building some pretty cool technology, I ended up going out and doing my own startup.
Tech startup.
Tech marketing. It was a 3D animation company, and it was pretty early. I mean, if you think about it, this is the 2000 time frame. Yeah. There was this inflection where microprocessing power kind of got to a certain point. The software kind of got to a certain point. You could afford to buy machines that could actually render. When I was much younger, I had some aspiration of being an artist. I wasn't a very good one, but I was a creative. And so I knew a bunch of folks that were really talented artists, and they were showing me this cool technology. And so I had to scratch my itch. And so started this company that did 3D animations and visuals and all 3D renderings. And so started it in Boston, moved it to Denver. There were 4 universities graduating animation degrees. And no jobs in Denver for animators. They all had to move to LA. And so the hypothesis was that we could pick up talent that wanted the Colorado lifestyle. We could kind of centralize a shop, and we did that. And most of this was around the real estate business. We were doing all these virtual fly-throughs and tours of a bunch of the condo buildings that got built in Miami, right? And they'd try to sell the building out ahead of time. And so that was my first start. I've never really figured out how to scale the business. It was fun. I got my lifestyle business out of it. We had a little putt-putt course through the studio. We had the green screen. We had the lighting. We were doing really innovative stuff at the time and kind of pushing the boundaries. But after a few years, I think we call it 5 years of doing that. I just couldn't figure out how to scale the business. We didn't get into motion pictures. We weren't taking on projects of that size and scale, and that's I just really didn't know anything about that. But I knew how to market and was able to kind of create a nice business niche. Ultimately, I moved off of that, sold the company to the employees. Nothing to write home about, but kind of got out with my shirt.
Went on for the next chapter.
Got out with my shirt on and a bunch of experience, right? And so that was pretty good. And then because I had grown up in Springfield, Ohio, out in the cornfields and soybean fields, and I knew some folks at Fidelity and some other interesting investment folks. I started working on this investment thesis, which was private equity for U.S. farmland. It was right around the renewable portfolio standard time with ethanol. The first ethanol boom was really starting to take off. I thought I knew a lot about agriculture and farming from just the way I grew up. I thought I knew a little bit about how fund structures worked and how investments worked. And so started working on this with the backing of a pretty big hedge fund guy that kind of initially paid for me to explore this concept, put together a business plan, do some research around it, and ultimately delivered the plan. And it was like, 10% return but bomb proof and we're going to do these cool things with wind and solar and renewables that we don't quite understand yet, but we think we can drive additional yield, return from these interesting sectors. And this is a very successful hedge fund manager guy that said, I don't get out of bed for that, right? And so he essentially said, I don't want to do it, but then kind of let me take a run at it and had kind of paid me to put together a business plan. So that was a good deal. So we went out and found a couple other hedge fund guys and started putting together this private equity fund for U.S. farmland on this investment thesis. And that was going well. It's been a couple of years. I was out bouncing around the Midwest in a pickup truck, half the time thinking about assets and kind of strategically aligning different assets. And then also was kind of doing capital raising. We had some capital committed, but not called. We were getting ready to call capital, and Lehman Brothers blows up, right? And so just awful timing. Just failure to launch. Spent a couple years on it. And so
but that led you to a great spot, because I think we're going to talk about Hawaii.
It did. Yes. So one of the hedge fund guys that had been in the second round and backed me, he was talking to me afterwards, and he said, "So what are you going to do now?" And I was like, I don't know, but that solar stuff was kind of cool, right? And I was really kind of interested in that, and I might go deep on that. And he said, "You know what? Go look at the Hawaii market and some of the fundamentals there, and let me know if you want to do something there." So, kudos to this guy for taking a lump on one side and still kind of hanging in there with me. Ultimately, ended up moving out to Hawaii. The fundamentals were right on point. They had the highest cost of power in the country. There was a state and federal tax credit. So there's a federal tax credit like we have now still. 30%, the federal government would pay for it. And the state was layering in a 35% tax credit. So 65% of the cost of the solar system was covered. This is back then. That's not the case anymore. But with really high power costs, even though solar was expensive, we were seeing just amazing return on investment, short-term returns. We would be cash on cash on a commercial deal where we could pull all the levers, depreciation, and all of that, in 4 years. And these are 20-year assets, right? And so and highly predictable. And so moved out to Hawaii, started it with equity and tax equity. And initially the concept was start to invest in, originate projects and start to invest in them. And so that in itself was a little bit tricky. We had this idea that we would go out and work with nonprofits that couldn't take advantage. They didn't have the tax appetite. They weren't federal taxpayers or state taxpayers. And so they really weren't getting the benefit, but it would be a church or a school or Red Cross of Hawaii, big well-heeled organizations that own their buildings and their facilities that really probably should be getting lower cost power and green renewable electrons. And so that was the kind of initial investment thesis. I partnered with this company called Sunetric and said, look, I'll bring the capital. You guys, you're an EPC. You're a solar project developer. They had full construction capabilities and licensing. And you'll give me some preferred pricing, and I'll back your deals and the whole thing. And so we started doing that, and it worked really well. And I wasn't out shopping all my deals to every single EPC. It was like a strategic alliance through and through that really just hit the right point at the right time. They had marketing capabilities with people that it's important to be local there, right? I was the new guy. Sure. I was the carpetbagger from Ohio. Yeah.
Even worse, East Coast.
With an East Coast accent, right? By then, exactly. So the one thing led to another, and the founder of that company is a guy by the name of Sean Mullen. Sean pretty swiftly said, "Hey, man, do you want to maybe take over this company too and see if we can scale it?" And we decided we'd try to grow the business and ultimately sell it. So we did. At the time, we were the largest solar company in the state. We were doing a lot of Department of Defense projects, big commercial projects. We were doing utility scale projects.
What time frame is this?
So we sold in 2014. So this is like 98, 99 time frame into 2014 we sold. So there was an exit event then.
09, not 99. You mean?
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay,
I'm
09.
sorry.
That's right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. 5 years, not 15.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. About a 5 year. Yeah. About a 5 year time frame. So
That's a great time.
it was fabulous. I got to live in Hawaii for several years. That's an interesting. Anytime you start talking about Hawaii, people just remember like their honeymoon or their favorite trip, and they just immediately go into this smile, and they're like, "Wow,
Must have been great."
I would have done that." Yeah. It was a lot of work. It wasn't all golf and surfing, right? It was a lot of work, but we grew the company to be a couple hundred people, which is in Hawaii, you're either work for the like some form of the government. Or tourism. Those are the big employers, and so to develop multi-island, we had to be pretty sophisticated. We had warehouses on different islands. We had different there was something to it. So and that taught me a lot. So Fidelity kind of taught me how to develop a product and a project and put a business plan around it. Then I went and did the 3D animation thing and kind of did my own thing, and now got a chance to start to deploy this renewable energy technology and innovate within that space, and so that's the very long way around of how I got into this category of developing projects that are the core structure of the revenue model. Has some tax component related to it. And I know a lot of people kind of glaze over when they...
He's going to talk about taxes.
Tax credits were, so I sold my business.
We talked off before you got in here. We were talking offline about, what makes a good show. And I said, no, tax. We have a guy that he's very passionate about tax and what it does for businesses. I said, if you start going down, the trail of
all 7 people that listen to the tax podcast love it.
That's right. So we go too deep here. We might have to pull the eject button on tax.
Yeah.
But
you just raise your hand.
But Carbonvert. So
yeah.
What is it?
Look at Gridjet. We just skipped right through tax.
Fair enough.
Yes, we'll come back to tax.
It is carbon capture.
We'll come back to tax.
Carbon capture storage company, right?
Okay.
Carbon capture sequestration, we can call it. So CCS, and essentially we catch CO2 coming off of various emissions types. Everything we do in life has CO2 emissions related to it. Your car, drive to work, but fly an airplane, whatever it is. But these big industrial processes, like we have here in Texas, where petrochemical refining, they put out a lot of CO2 into the atmosphere. And the idea is that we catch it and we move it to a place where there's a storage site, usually by a pipeline, but you can move it by truck, you can move it by rail. There's different ways to do it. And then you stick it in the ground, deep in the ground, into known storage formations, reservoirs, where there's a cap rock, and it never comes out. And so you continue to do that. The idea is to build out as much CCS as possible because there's too much CO2 in the atmosphere, and we keep dumping more in there. And so we should abate, we should stop dumping more and start putting it in the ground. And then there's more advanced kind of versions of that where you start catching CO2 out of thin air and sticking it in the ground. But the in the ground is the really important. It's permanent, durable. It goes away forever. It's basically going back to where it came from. These are all hydrocarbons coming out of the ground that have been stuck there forever. That we go out and find and bring them up, do something to them, and then release the carbon dioxide into the air. We're just reversing that and taking it. It's a reverse oil and gas process.
And so it feels like you're ahead of the game, or from my perspective, having talked to a number of folks about different carbon capture technologies and processes and whatnot. So talk to us a little bit about the projects you're working on, the partners you have. Your website shows a lot of this, but it's better to hear it from you. So you've got some pretty high profile stuff going on. Talk a little bit about
we have 2 Halo projects, and they're kind of like bookends. They're very different from each other, and then there's a whole bunch of types of projects that we're working on in between as well. But the one main one is it's called Bayou Bend, and it's a partnership first between Carbonvert and Talos Energy, which is an offshore operator in the Gulf of Mexico. We teamed up 50-50 to respond to an RFP. We knew the state of Texas was interested in doing carbon sequestration. They're a big landowner. They have lots of what we call pore space, where there was a good place to put CO2 in the ground forever. And we knew that there was an RFP coming out. They had been talking about it at conferences for almost a decade, for a very long time. They were doing a lot of research on it, and they were publishing their research. And so we knew this was coming forth, and we teamed up and said, Carbonvert's experience is like around tax credit financing and project finance and some of the weird things that go into making the revenue model work on one of these things, just like solar. And then my partner Jan Sherman, who founded the company with me, she had just retired from Shell as general manager of carbon capture for Shell North America. So she'd spent 30 years at Shell, and at one point she was the global enhanced oil recovery manager for Shell. So, and that's where a lot of this technology was developed. It was in EOR, right? And so the capabilities and the know-how, we had a pretty unique, and then the rest of our team had technical experience with real projects. There's only about 30 of these projects in the world, and our team that we had put together had direct experience with 3 of the 30. So like 10% of the market we could point to and say, yeah, we either helped develop it or operated it and decommissioned it, and these are large scale, million ton a year. So Talos partnered with us. We responded to the RFP. Lots of other public companies did, and we were in the end awarded what ended up being a 40,000 acre lease.
But before we move off past that, the website is good. It does. So if people are interested in it, they can look at what is it? Carbonvert.com.
Carbonvert.com.
Okay, and then there's a bunch of press releases on your site that they want more.
A couple project.
Right.
Yep. That's
okay.
right.
So and you mentioned details. Jan as well.
The team's on there. Yeah.
Your team is unique, and it wasn't what I was expecting. It's not a bunch of renewable people. There's a lot more oil and gas involved in there.
Yeah.
Than I was.
It's
expecting.
Reverse oil and gas.
It's a
right?
lot. Jan's a 30-year oil and gas person.
Yeah.
Retired and then came straight into this.
Yeah.
This business isn't that old either.
No, Carbonvert's 2 years old.
Okay. Late 2020.
Late 2020. It was like October, I think, when we filed. Got our first EIN number. So we're brand spanking new. I had spent a couple of years studying it. The tax code change. I know I keep going back to this tax code thing, but this is the revenue model that drives it. There's something called 45Q where the government, the U.S. government, basically came out and said, we'll pay you $50 a ton to put CO2 in the ground. You got to figure out the rest. You got to capture it. You got to transport it. You got to store it. You got to get the lease. You got to do all the engineering. You got to do all the stuff related to it. But there's a $50 bounty per ton. And that's since been raised to $85 a ton
with the IRA.
Mm-hmm. But that was revolutionary when there was a pre-existing 45Q that was like $10 and $20. It was like $10 if you did EOR and $20 if you did pure storage, and that just wasn't enough money to make projects work. When they hit $50 a ton for storage, that was enough to make projects work, and so it activated an entire industry.
So 50 to 85 really supercharged things.
It did. I mean, it's interesting. Sometimes, we're pouring gas on an existing fire. There was an opportunity to do some stuff at 50, and now the government has just come in and said, like, we want to go hard and fast with this.
Game changer.
So the concept is get carbon out of the atmosphere, and the government's supporting this by this 45Q tax credit that you're talking about.
That's right.
Which has gone from 50 to 85. So maybe, and I want to come back to Bayou Bend because we haven't talked about Chevron yet, and that's another partner that you have. And so you've accumulated some pretty big names in a pretty short period of time as partners, which is impressive. But so take us through $85 per ton of CO2. How's that getting? Is that all your revenue? Where does the money go? Because you're going to have costs associated with it too. Because you talked about capture, you talked about transport. How's it all getting divided up?
Well, that's really the challenge, right? And so you have emitters, you have industrial processes that you have to build capture on their facilities, and they have to be willing and active partners, and they probably don't want to lose money doing it. They might not need to make a huge return because hopefully they can sell their decarbonized commodity product for a higher value, or recognize that through some additional value in the market.
But I think that's important, right? The emitters, the reason they're emitting is because the normal equipment that they have on site today has CO2 as an emission, and it goes into the atmosphere.
It's not considered a pollutant,
right?
In the U.S. right now, so it's not regulated like NOx and SOx. You're only allowed, you get your EPA kind of air permits, and CO2 right now is free and fine to dump into the atmosphere. And so technically, this becomes a cost. If there's, if you think about no 45Q, no $85 from the U.S. government, there is a cost. There is going to be a cost to build a bunch of equipment, engineer it, build it, operate it,
which could cost tens of millions of dollars.
Could cost $1 billion. Right?
Okay.
There's a very famous CCS project here in the Houston area that attaches to a portion of a coal-fired power plant. It's a project called Petronova, and that project only catching about I think it was 1 million tons a year off of a coal plant that does like 3 or 4 million tons a year. Was like $1 billion investment. Yeah. Now, those costs are going to come down over time and so forth, and it was really innovative at the time. And those
science projects always cost more, but
these, the fundamental, it's not like it's going to be like solar where you saw 90% drop in hard costs in fixed equipment. That's what we've seen over the past decade in the renewable energy business. There were things that you were able to scale. Technology could get better. You could amplify through manufacturing. You're going to get some increases, but you're not going to get a 90% drop in capture costs.
Yep.
So of the $85, we're going to have to capture, and that plant may cost $1 billion. Then you, depending on where you are, and this is just the way the cards fall, like the way the chips fall, you may be sitting directly on a great storage site where you can go straight down into the ground and you have almost zero transportation costs. Or you may be hundreds of miles away from a good storage site. And so there's there's two famous projects right now in the Midwest where they're connecting ethanol plants that are very far apart from each other. And the storage is also disparately kind of spread out. And so they're building these like 2,000-mile pipelines to move this, to join and gather the CO2 and take it all to centralized storage. So
Summit and
Navigator. Yeah, that's right. And so, that's really the two ends of the spectrum, right? And so that cost can be great, or that cost can be almost nothing. And then there's the storage cost, which, what does that cost? Well, it depends on what it costs you to lease the land, to drill the well, and to operate the site, and how much insurance. People are very concerned. The number one question we get is, what happens if it leaks, right? And so we have to, not only do we do the geomechanics around it and engineer around it and do this really interesting subsurface work to make sure that happens, that doesn't happen, but you also have to put things like insurance products on it and so forth, so that, in the event that there's a leak, you have, these are 20, 30, 50-year life assets. Governments want to make sure that project is going to be there. And even if Carbonvert's not around, somebody's there, some policy or bond or whatever it is there to pay for plugging this or fixing this and making whatever that change is. So
even though technically a leak, you're leaking something that
was going to go
anyway, but
it was going to go.
You've gotten paid $85 to make sure it doesn't, and so
that's right.
So we don't want a Ponzi scheme where we get paid $85 and then don't actually sequester.
That would be
that'd be bad.
That would be unfortunate,
right? Yeah. So we got $85 to play with, and what you're saying is the midstream component can be small or big depending on location. The capture piece, ethanol, you're capturing it anyway. Other stuff, chemical facilities, et cetera, got to build new stuff. And then you guys have to make money on
our investors have to make money. You're going to put some leverage on it, right? So there's going to be a lender involved. It's project finance that you kind of have to reward all the parties at some level, and to create a motivation. And that's ultimately what Carbonvert. Look, we don't have the deep technical capabilities and staff that our partner Talos does. Chevron has now bought into the deal. They're a great partner, right? They bought 50% of this Bayou Bend project from us. amazing capabilities there, right? Our role,
and they did that because I want to get back to your role, but they did that because they wanted to do a decarbonizing project, or they want to use it to put their own carbon away.
They actually don't have a lot of emissions in the Port Arthur area where we're building this first project.
Okay. So they're just viewing it as an energy transition initiative.
They've made a tremendous commitment to the market on the decarbonization front. They've put $10 billion in a pool that they plan to deploy into the categories.
And you're one of the early.
And we were one of the earliest, and our project is tremendous. I mentioned that there's only like 30 of these projects in the world that are considered large, and they do about 1 million tons a year or more. 1 million tons a year is like, okay, now you're a big project. Our project that we're developing does 10 million tons a year. So by order, factor of 10, the magnitude of this project is enormous. And we can do that because we're in the offshore environment, because we won this big lease with the state of Texas, 40,380 acres, something like that. And so we're, the project is sited within 30-mile radius of like 35 million tons a year of CO2 emissions. So we know it's like target rich. There's a bunch of emitters in the area, 35 million tons a year of emissions, and we can handle about a third. And we actually think we can scale that site over time and grow it. It doesn't just go 30 years and turn off. That you can actually develop. We would have to expand the footprint of the site.
But my impression of your business is that it's more than just being someone who owns 40,000 acres offshore and stands there and says, bring in the truck, boys.
Right.
So talk to us a little bit about the overall business model.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, and we've got this question a lot where people are like, I just don't understand, how is Carbonvert, this tiny startup that didn't exist 2 years ago, that now we just hit 10 people, but that we doubled in size in the last 12 months to get to 10. How did you guys get this project, these partners, the whole thing? And one part of it is that we have great technical, look at our team, look at our really unique kind of capabilities. But we're kind of you can call us the glue or the lubricant, right? Where we come in and help kind of commercialize the deal. We find the opportunities early on. These big companies, they have great capabilities, but it's hard for them to be innovative and creative and nimble and dynamic.
I mean, can I kind of answer that?
Sure.
From just an outsider's perspective looking at this? Their website, when I was doing some research here, your website feels like you guys understand the situation. It doesn't feel like you understand one part of it. And I actually go back to your Hawaii experience, the EPC.
Yeah. As
an EPC, you have to understand a lot of different supply chain, manufacturing, construction, people. Right. There's a lot of moving parts in an EPC.
That's right.
Engineering, procurement, construction, right? And anybody in the Houston area is going to understand what the Jacobs and the oil and gas EPC companies look like. And that's a lot of moving parts in that world. And to me, when I saw that on the experience, that helped me understand how you put together this team so quickly. And when you look at the website, what all you're doing, again, I'm not... You're a guest we've just met, but sure. it feels like you guys understand the complexity of the tax. See, I'll talk tax for just a second. But I mean, if you can understand that,
on tax,
that's as deep as I'm going. But I mean, am I right in to say that you guys have your hands around the issue? And I'm not trying to pump you up in this, but it feels like that's what I'm looking at while you're growing so quickly.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, we went into a big global company that was not proceeding with their capture project on their emissions because their tax department, we keep saying tax, had shut it down and said, hey, we're not a federal taxpayer, we can't fund this, right? And so there's there's all these little parts that you have to really deeply understand. So we went in and we taught them how partnership flip tax structures work and how we could bring capital to the project, and the tax department called the engineering department and said, okay, we're good to proceed, start working on this, start doing the work. And so these are weird disciplines, right? There's Class 6 permits. There's only a handful of issued Class 6 permits. That's the CO2 disposal permit. There's only a handful of those in the world that have ever been issued. It used to be a Class 5. Now it's called a Class 6. Our VP of storage helped the DOE develop the Class 6 permit and has been on multiple Class 6 permitting processes, right? And so it's that level of really understanding all the friction points within a project opportunity, and then having kind of this commercial ability to be nimble and fast, move fairly light-footed. Some companies are worried about the reputational risk. What if we go after it and we lose it? What if we go after it and then something it gets bad press? Like, so there's kind of barriers to entry that all we're really trying to do is put carbon in the ground. Mm-hmm. Fast, cheap, safe. That's it. And so I think that, and we don't want to compete with these guys. I don't want to rebuild.
You don't want to compete with these guys.
The various guys? The various stakeholders that make a successful project work.
Okay.
Chevron, Talos. I don't need to replicate what they are. Mm-hmm. I can bring my skills and my team, and they can bring their skills and their team, and we can break loose these projects and make them come to life. And
so let's talk about that a little bit. I'm sitting here. I'm an emitter. I'm a 2 million tons a year mm-hmm. manufacturing facility of some sort on the Gulf Coast. And do you come in and say, we can do it all for you? We'll oversee the capture facility construction all the way to the injection? Mm-hmm. Or do they say, wait a second, I really only want your pore space? I mean, is it an a la carte thing, or is it a holistic?
What's it need? It really is what's it need. Some folks have said, hey, we're in the gas business, right? We handle gas for a living. We have our own capture tech. We have our own this and that. We actually just want to turn it over at the fence line. We want you to take it away, and we never want to hear about it again.
Yep.
Right? And we need you to know that you'll do that in a safe, secure way, and that's great. And so in that case, we may be we're transport and storage. We're going to pick it up and take it away. In other cases, we've got folks that are saying, help me decarbonize my portfolio. Here's all my assets around the U.S. How can we, where do we start? How do we do it? What does it cost? And we're able to help with that. We are project developers, so we come in with capital and expertise, and we invest in the project. We don't have to own 100% of it. We're happy to own our piece of it, right? And deliver our piece. The Chevron Talos Carbonvert partnership, we now own 25%. And that's primarily a transport and storage project. It's really not capture. If somebody in that area asked us to help with capture.
This is Bayou Bend.
Bayou Bend. We'd be happy to help.
50% Chevron, 25 Talos, 25 you.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
That's a big percentage.
It's a big percentage.
For a 2-year-old company with those players.
It is.
Okay.
And Alex, you say you bring capital. Mm-hmm. So that's sitting on your balance sheet, or that's access to project finance people, or it's the experience. You're taking your solar knowledge and bringing it to carbon capture.
So you can do it a couple of ways. I mean, we raised a small round of capital when we started the company, and then fortunately we've already sold down a piece of one of our assets, and mm-hmm. so that put some real kind of balance sheet. It gave us some capital on our own balance sheet. So we do have our own money that we can go and invest. These projects are very expensive. They can be hundreds of millions of dollars, mm-hmm. If not billions of dollars for capture. And so, that is kind of an ongoing in my project finance background, lining up appropriate capital partners and being able to kind of tap the right capital for the right project. The right financing when it's required is something that we also spend a lot of time doing. And there's a lot of capital out there. There's a whole bunch of energy transition funds that used to be an oil and gas fund. They had to kind of pivot and rebrand themselves and repackage themselves. And so there is equity in the market. That has an interest in coming to these types of projects.
Yeah.
And
companies. So you don't see capital availability as a big hurdle there. Folks who want to put
knock on wood or whatever this is made out of. The right now, this is a good market to be in, and I know there's headwinds in other markets, and we got the tailwind right now.
So we're talking like there's 50 projects underway in the U.S. There aren't, right? And I looking, unless something changed in the last 6 hours on your website, you haven't talked about any customers yet.
Yeah.
How do you think about the timeline here? When are folks going to break free and actually sign you up?
Yeah.
And then when they do, when do they start putting molecules in the ground?
We anticipate it soon. We're having a number of conversations with emitters. I'm hesitant to name a date, but my sense is whenever the first one drops, then it'll be a fear of missing out, right? The FOMO, because there's a limited capacity on the initial spec, which is 10 million tons a year.
Are we calling these people emitters?
It's a little bit lazy on our part, but yeah.
Customers.
They're customers.
Yeah. Customers, valued customers.
We shouldn't call them emitters. It's funny. We were talking to some of the direct air capture guys the other day, and I called them an emitter, and they were like, I'm not an emitter. I capture. And I was like, yeah, I guess you're right, but it's lazy. Apologies.
Yes, carbon generators carbon owners.
They're different entities that have control of CO2 that may want to. Yeah.
There we go. Just trying to clarify what we're talking about.
Thank you.
So there's some building momentum that
absolutely
that things are
It's not like we're waking up after a big investment years down the road and saying, oh, now we got to figure out customers. We're working on it. But customers want to see progress. They need to kind of organize their own capital internally. They need to make sure that their boards and their various investment committees need to have confidence that the project's going to go forward. And so there's a little bit of a chicken and an egg. Mm-hmm. And so what we've been able to do initially is just go out and invest in it and lead with our capital and lead with our partners' capital. And so we're doing that, but we're definitely having conversations.
So somebody signs up.
Mm-hmm.
How long does it take to get molecules in the ground?
So right now we think that there's a big question mark hangs on the Class 6 permit process. We think we're pretty good at doing Class 6 permits with our experience on our team. But that said, there's
permitted by the EPA.
EPA, that's right. That can take a couple of years is kind of the current thinking on that, although they're kind of getting backlogged with these opportunities right now. But there's things that lead up to it. Like we actually have to go out and drill a test well to grab some of the core data to include in our EPA Class 6 filing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's difficult right now to get an offshore rig. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
Yeah. So jackup rigs are in short supply, have been kind of mothballed and then rated for parts. And so you've got a limited fleet out there, and so that's actually setting some pacing. It's the way the world works, right? When you take on the first offshore project, you're gonna find out all kinds of stuff like this.
That's a great example of the $1 part that
holding
can't fix something, that can't go into this, that can't do that.
Chip.
Yes, exactly.
That's
exactly.
Right. That's right. That's right.
So suffice it to say, even with a customer, it's a 25.
We've publicly, our partnership has talked about late 2025.
Yep.
And depending on the permitting and rig availability, it could slide.
Could be later.
It could slide into 2026. Yeah. I don't anticipate it sliding past 2026 at this point.
Okay. So now I'm going to say the word tax.
Dun, dun, dun.
So 45Q, which is $85 a ton, is a tax credit.
It is a tax
and
credit.
So are these tradable, easily turned into money? Do they come over time?
Yeah.
Give us the layman's version of 45Q. And I know we haven't done one in carbon capture yet, but I assume it's coming.
So there are actually one or two projects
have
traded some that have monetized tax credits is what I should call it.
And again, just while you're getting into this, their website does a great job explaining this just to the people that want more information.
Yeah.
So
excellent.
Keep going there, but
historically, tax credits could not be sold. You had to enter into these partnership structures where you had somebody with a lot of federal tax liability would come in and invest money and then get the tax benefits back. And it was very convoluted. And that's basically what I've been doing for the last 15 years. Yeah. It's a complex business that makes the world go round in solar and wind. The IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, has changed the rules significantly around what you're able to do. You're now able. We couldn't even call it selling them. Like we couldn't shorthand that because it would get, picked up.
Things up.
Yeah. And so now you can sell tax credits. Now you can transfer tax credits. You can do all kinds of different things that never existed before. There's still an incumbent industry around tax credits, tax equity structures, lawyers and accountants and the capital markets and syndicators and all these other things that have existed to date to make this thing work, that I think is changing, and it is becoming different. But these are oftentimes a tax equity investor that would be deploying tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. Some of the biggest, J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, do billions of dollars a year in tax equity investments, right? They're pretty sensitive to not doing whatever is new and untested, right? And so there is going to be this kind of the old style way of doing tax credit monetization through tax equity structures, but I think there's going to be this evolving new market, and we're spending a lot of time on that as well. And so it's hard to talk about, and quite frankly, it's not done yet. But we think we've come up with a pretty novel model to monetize tax credits, not only for our own projects. We kind of started with, what do we need to do to drive down the cost of capital? The absolute, how do we be lowest cost, fastest, and safest CO2 storage partner out there? And so that requires us to figure out the tax credits piece and how it relates to the new rules. But then kind of once we unpacked that and we came up with a structure that we think works and investors will like and lenders will like, then we also realized that this could be a novel way for us to participate in other projects. We don't need to build every CCS project. We won't. We can't. That's not what we're here for. We're here to help the industry move forward. And we bring our technical capabilities and we bring our financing capabilities with these strange revenue models. There's also carbon markets that you can stack. So you do tax credits and these carbon offsets as part of your revenue model with this foundation of technical excellence around CCS and permitting and the friction points. That's really the business model that we've kind of landed on, and that's what the market's been responding to.
So it's mind-blowing. But what you just described is the government's actually enabling something to be easier than it has been and faster than it has been. Although the permitting, they could still mess it up there.
Yeah.
But the IRA has been impressive in that it's actually creating activity. It is doing what it's supposed to do. And I've heard more people talk about the IRA as an enabler, which you typically, what you hear is the government messes things up. I mean, it looks like it's working. It shows you
how serious they are this time.
Yeah, for sure. Alex, are you a net zero guy? We should be there. Can we get there? What's your big picture on energy transition and net zero?
I am incredibly optimistic. It is a lot. There's a lot to be done. We're going to have so the way some of these rules are written, it's like for 12 years we'll create this benefit. There's going to have to be extensions. There's going to have to be more runway because these are long life assets and big projects that take time and operate for a long time, and they're going to need to do that to have the impact that it seems like we've finally come around on that we need to have. So I'm optimistic. I think it can happen. But it's going to take a lot. It's not just one Bayou Bend. It's not just 10 of these projects. It solves this. There's literally going to have to be hundreds, if not thousands, of these projects all across America and then also around the world. The U.S. is leading.
Remind us what the U.S. generates in terms of carbon emissions on a yearly basis.
I don't know if I know that often. I forget. I forget that.
I'm
one
not trying to ask
thousands of millions of tons.
Which
goes to your
it's a lot.
We're not trying to pump up any of your competitors, but are there more people trying to come in and compete with you right now when we're talking about?
So this happened in solar, right? I mean, when I went into the solar business, it was you had to basically solar economically worked in Hawaii and California. The technology worked wherever, but from an economic standpoint, it's a function of the cost of power, right? And that offset, like, because you're offsetting normal grid power versus this other means of delivery. And where it started to work, and then as prices came down, you started to open up other markets. You start to hit price parity in other places, and like there's a proliferation of solar companies out there. There's more people in this. I mean, back 10 years ago when I was doing solar, we outpaced how many people were in the solar business than in the coal business in the U.S. Like that was 10 years ago. So now I know, like it's totally, that will happen in this business. There will be many CCS companies. There will be many projects, and that's all technically good for us. And so, yeah, as
want the pie to grow.
You do, because what we're trying to do is really important, and we can't do it all ourselves. And so we want Exxon to be successful, and we want Chevron to be successful, and we want these global players to become successful, and we want the little guys to be successful. Like, and ultimately, if you can really focus on that, and find a way to create value, then great. Like,
are you dependent on any specific technology, or do you have any? Are you using anything proprietary, or are you using all kind of off the shelf?
We are
stuff?
Technology agnostic, and that's a lesson from the renewable energy wave, right? There was lots of solar company manufacturers that came, and Germany had a big business, and then the U.S. had a big business, and then China blew them all out by low pricing the modules, which technically was good for the whole world, but it wasn't good for the guy that owns the solar manufacturer in Germany or in Ohio, right? And so there's a lot of kind of up and down that comes with that. But if you're really trying to create low carbon, no carbon electrons, then okay, great. We saw that where there was plenty of value creation in finding and originating a project and investing in it and taking it through its life cycle and actually implementing it, turning it on, and then selling power. Like, there's plenty to be done there without getting too tied up in technology. I'm going to let technology guys do their technology thing, let them innovate. There's billions of dollars flowing into that capture side, and we'll just pick the best technology for the best case.
Yeah.
Hopefully it gets better and lowers in price over time.
Want to shift away from CCUS before we do that. Have we covered everything that we should know about kind of CCS projects and what you're doing? And
so we talked a lot about Bayou Bend. The one thing I would say, we've got a lot of other projects out there that we're working that we haven't disclosed. They're not public yet. We do have one other. We won a Department of Energy award. We partnered with Southern Company, University of Alabama, Air Capture. I'm sure I'm going to forget Sargent and Lundy. There's a kind of a consortium that we pulled together, Battelle. And basically we won a DOE award to go and start to study a nuclear power plant to direct air capture to geologic storage. And so that's really like 10-year out thinking, in my opinion, of like direct air capture is sucking it out of thin air, and it's very power hungry, and it has to be green electrons or it's just kind of
you're not
stupid.
Accomplishing anything.
Yeah, it doesn't do anything. And it requires a lot of heat, and nuclear power plants throw off a lot of green electrons and a lot of heat. And so there's this like, how do we optimize? What would this actually 10-year out kind of look like? And so, from what we're working on, it's the biggest first offshore large-scale storage project in the Americas, all the way out to 10-year out nuke to DAC to storage. And so we're not trying to do it all, but we're doing other projects in between, and we're kind of creating these partnerships and alliances with big global companies in some cases, and sometimes it's small regional companies. But if creating those partnerships leads to more velocity and the higher probability of a project and CO2 going in the ground, then we get involved.
Right. Yeah. I said we were moving away, but you have a lot going on. You talked about being a small company in a capital intensive business.
Yep.
Are we going to see you out raising more money for Carbonvert in the next little while to sort of keep pace with all these things?
Yes, it is highly likely that Carbonvert will be out raising more capital.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is your fourth business as you talk through the things that you've done.
Yep.
So for our listeners.
I had some losers in between that I don't talk about. Just
Okay.
to be fair.
Maybe it's your
they don't all win.
Maybe it's his sixth business. But
Exactly.
You've clearly gone from an idea to deploying capital to hiring people
Yep.
a bunch of times.
That's true.
So for the listeners that are entrepreneurs thinking about trying to grow and start a business, what do you tell them? What are your pieces of sage wisdom?
It takes a lot of risk, and you just kind of got to jump off the cliff. Like I've met folks that are like, I'm doing this on my nights and weekends, and that's great for a start, but at some point you can't nights and weekend it and actually launch. You got to make that commitment where you're like, I'm not going to get paid for maybe 6 months, 12 months, whatever it is. Or you got to go get friends, families, and fools to throw it. Whatever you got to do to get that initial pool of capital, and you got to go show that commitment in order to probably raise that capital, right? And so it's not that it's easy. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying you just got to go do it, and potentially take a couple of stingers. It's the unfortunate truth. It hurts, but
But you learn.
And
that is good
and get
advice.
great partners.
Yeah. Well, we're jumping straight to the lightning round because we're running.
We're hitting time.
Yeah, we're hitting time.
Okay.
Right. We're going close to the atmosphere.
Perfect. Before we do that, Carbonvert.com.
Carbonvert.com.
Perfect.
Carbon, VERT.com.
Perfect.
And by the way, you two both look great. Dan was on CNBC today. He's in a suit. And I asked him when he got here, I said, have you ever done a podcast? He says, no, I've done radio and television. I'm like, what in the world is going on? So we're going to take a picture and we'll be on YouTube. You guys both just look great. So congratulations.
It's the lighting. It's the lighting, Josh.
So we have to do this before you leave. This is my favorite thing we do.
I'm in.
I just like seeing
I've
Dan's
been
face
prepped.
on a couple of these. So
Yes.
I've been prepped.
Yeah.
All right. You ready? I'll start us off here, Dan.
Okay.
Where are we at here? All right. This first one's not even fair. These are single word, short answers. You're not allowed to expand. One word answers. Ready?
Okay.
Massachusetts or Hawaii?
Hawaii. That was
the most obvious answer of all time. Avatar or Raiders of the Lost Ark?
Avatar.
Cash or crypto?
Cash.
2023 S&P 500. Are you bullish or bearish?
I'm bearish.
F-150 gas, F-150 lightning.
Lightning.
I'm asking the serious questions this time. Does the Ukraine conflict continue into 2024?
Yes.
That sucks. You're getting pizza or sushi?
Pizza.
Classical or jazz?
Classical.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a tough one.
Neither.
Honestly, I can't say I listen to either of those.
Work from the office or work from home?
Work from office or a hotel lobby. That's what I tend to do now.
Your new office.
Yeah.
The IRA was a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Are we going to see another one like it here in the U.S. in the next 3 years?
Like another increase?
Yeah.
No.
Attack on.
No.
World Cup or March Madness?
March Madness.
My favorite question. Basically, your invitation to come back hinges on the answer to this question.
Yes, this is
Okay.
Will the Houston Texans make the Super Bowl in the next decade?
Not a chance.
No invite. No invite.
I'm sorry.
No, we'll definitely invite you back because one, you're a great guest. Two, you have
Great
a lot
guest.
to educate us about, and you'll have a lot of progress. And so we'll do this again in 12 or 18 months. But Alex Tiller, founder of Carbonvert, CEO of Carbonvert, and a good guy. Thank you for coming by today.
Thank you,
Dan.
Tom.
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah,
appreciate it.